welcome everyone for this special meeting. And the first thing we have is the public comment period, and we'll start with Ray Taylor, please. Okay. We welcome you this morning.
Yes, nice to see you. I want to start off by saying many of us really appreciate the new leadership that Mayor Sessoms and Molly Ward have brought to the whole MPO thing. It augurs well for the future. Also very delighted to see that high-speed rail or passenger rail is being added to the MPO agenda. It is, of course, a piece of surface transportation, and other MPOs do that. My quick idea this morning is to encourage that we look into the future and aim high. I know Will does that all the time, so does Molly. To spur that thought, I'll pass on two quick anecdotes at a national level. One is a recent report from the High Speed Rail Association has produced 4 maps of the long-term future high-speed rail around the country, a 2015, a 2020, 2025, and across those maps and over that time, beyond what we've known in the past, Phoenix, Denver, Portland, Des Moines, and many other metro areas have been added, but Hampton Roads is not on the list. My other anecdote is a very credible organization, America 2050. Recently, their analysts put out a report, the best places for high-speed rail, the most effective, cost-effective, business-oriented. Hampton Roads ranked 44th. That's better than not being on the list. And in the funding priorities, 4 phases, Hampton Roads was in the 4th phase. I think our region is just so wonderful, so geostrategically important, that maybe they have missed the importance of our region and thus don't have us listed at all or higher. I think today you're starting a process that's going to bring it to into the atmosphere, and I think the rest of the country will acknowledge it, what's going to come out of today. So we have every chance here to aim high. I think it has to come from the MPO. It's always the case in human endeavor that if you want to get it done, you do it yourself. I've kind of reached a point where I'm not so sure that we can count on VDRTP to think about what this region should be down the road, or for that matter, Virginia's high-speed rail. We need our MPO to go toe-to-toe and bring us out into the future. Many here count on the MPO in all of its regional transportation endeavors, this being one of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker, if I'm saying this right, Gary Dubois. Is that Gary Dubois? Is there a Gary Dubois? Student at TCC Norfolk. We welcome you this morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Gary Dubois, and I am a student at Tidewater Community College's Norfolk campus. I am here because I strongly support the prospect of having light rail for Hampton Roads. One of my beliefs
Get closer to the microphone, please.
Sorry. One of my beliefs about high-speed rail is, besides improving the speed that it takes people to get from one place to another, in our area, it would provide an alternative for people who can't drive, such as myself, to evacuate if there's a hurricane. It would be an alternative to relieve some of the traffic congestion on some of our highways. It would help spur the economy as well, and I am hoping that we can get this not just for Hampton Roads, but also other parts of Virginia, North Carolina, Even though we don't actually cover North Carolina, I realize that, but because the importance for people to be able to get around, I think I kind of lost my train of thought, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right.
And the other reason, of course, is that it would help improve Amtrak service. I realize that there's only 2 or 3 departures out of Newport News every day, and you have to take a bus to get to the train station to begin with. So those are my primary reasons for supporting it. I've seen a whole bunch of different studies about it, and about high-speed rail. From various different sources, and it looks attractive. Some of the studies say that it may not be sustainable. I'm hoping that we're going to get this done, and we're going to do it, the most efficient manner as possible, with very little in the way of financial problems, and is something definitely we should be looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker, Henry Rito, please. We welcome you this morning.
Good morning. Here to speak to you in favor of higher speed rail this morning, and more or less I was here early, had a chance to read the draft resolutions. First of all, I'm happy to see that most of the substantive differences between you all have been ironed out. There's what the differences in those resolutions on the table are negligible. And as such, I wouldn't take up the valuable time this morning unless I could bring a fresh angle to this, which I'm going to cover right here, which is higher speed rail is part of a multimodal system for Hampton roads. Earlier this month, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with a member of the Virginia Beach City Council who is more or less lukewarm on light rail. And speak to me, he told me, higher speed rail is the key to making light rail work in Hampton roads. As part of a feeder system where you could take the light rail to the higher speed rail and move on well beyond the region, then in turn. If we are going to, and I think most of you here in this room realize we're not going to asphalt our way out of this region's transportation problems. Therefore, not only does higher speed rail itself make sense, but if it becomes part of selling point where we can sell the region on the other modes necessary to make such a system work, more power to us for doing it. Of that, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, Will Christopher, please. We welcome you today.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for what everybody's doing with this. I encourage this group to ensure that when the EIS comes out, to ensure that it truly represents this region. And I believe that I have a unique perspective here as a young professional in Hampton Roads, because I'm literally going to be around, God willing, for the next 50 or 60 years. So this directly impacts my creative class, my next generation of leaders. If we could do this all over again, we probably would want to be on true high-speed rail. We'd bend it down. We'd love to have that. We may not have that luxury. So I'd like to see true throughput, true 110 mile an hour. It's not just a difference, the 12-minute difference between to Richmond on 90 and 110. It's all the things that come with it, electric versus diesel. I'm thinking economic development here. I'm thinking big picture, local and global. I want to see this region grow and succeed. I want more tourists. I want to see more Fortune 500 companies. I want to attract and retain the creative class. We've got so much great potential here. I don't want to see us as the whole cul-de-sac, in the end of the line. I want to see us as a thriving region, and again, would encourage you to ensure that when the EIS comes out, that it fully represents this region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker, Grant Cothran. We welcome you.
Good morning, and thank you for your time. I work for the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, bringing international businesses to Virginia. And I just want to point out to this very capable body that two of our largest economic drivers in the state, the Port of Virginia and Dulles International Airport, are both, at their very essence, transportation connections. And I want to encourage you to think about high-speed rail and Hampton roads as an engine for our future economic growth, as well as leading to a higher quality of life. On a personal level, I've lived in Hampton Roads since I've had a choice. In Hampton, in Williamsburg, now in Norfolk. And while this body meets on a monthly basis and also has special meetings, such as this one, I want to encourage you to act much more quickly to establish a body perhaps that works on a daily basis, because this is a very highly competitive process. And meetings just like this one are going on all across the country. And in order to beat our competition, those other regions looking for the same kind of funding, we need to work quickly. We need to unify behind a single plan as a region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker, Bobby Wright. We welcome you today.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Bobby Wright. I'm a principal broker of the Wright Company, a commercial real estate and development firm based in downtown Norfolk. I'm also a resident of Virginia Beach. And I'm here to support the high-speed rail access that is being discussed throughout the nation. My main concern and the reason I am here is because we must remain competitive as a region. This is not about transportation that's comparable. If we accept something that is not equal to all the other metropolitan areas, we're not only not competitive, but now we're behind the game. So I'm here to support high-speed rail, meaning 110 miles per hour or higher to our region. In addition to that, I'd like for the board, as it continues to consider, and those elected officials that can make this difference, to ensure that we are considered on a federal level as a main line into the future. Right now, we're discussing a spur. So the spur needs to be 110 miles an hour so that it is high-speed rail, and we remain in that funding on the federal level. But let's not settle for just a spur. Let's also put in some way out there that we would like to be considered into the future a split main line, as they've done in North Carolina. North Carolina has been discussing this, as we know, for over a decade, and they've done a great job, and North Carolina continues to, in many ways, beat Virginia. And this is an example where Winston-Salem and Greensboro, metropolitan areas, 1/3 of our size, have a main line spur coming off of the other main line. We, Hampton Roads, we're sitting here talking about a spur, and a spur that may be just conventional rail versus high-speed rail. So I want to encourage those who can make a difference and the citizens to become involved. Let's make sure we get high-speed rail at the level that is of a national, so we can compete and remain strong as a region, and then look forward to possibly getting on a main line. We deserve it. We're the largest metropolitan area on the ocean between New York and Miami. There's no reason with the military, tourism, and life safety with evacuation that this would not be considered and seen as excellent and correct for our area. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please, Christopher Malinsky. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
We welcome you.
Come on. Distinguished board, engineers with TPO, and guests. I'm honored to be here today, and I also work for the Wright Company, a commercial real estate agent, soon to be a broker, in downtown Norfolk, but I have interest as far as regional transportation goes. You guys are our de facto governing body. Our unifying force for Hampton Roads is transportation, and we all need to work as a group. Remember the book Atlas Shrugged? Well, I'd like to coin a new phrase: Hampton Roads flexed. It's time for us to flex our muscles as a region, and this high-speed rail is key. And as Bobby said and others have mentioned, we cannot settle for anything less than the design of true high-speed rail. And I think there's reasons to justify coming down to Norfolk, and because our light rail is already about to be in place there, and then you can run light rail throughout Hampton roads, which they're already looking at, including possibly crossing, what I would support, crossing and connecting the peninsula with the south side. People forget the peninsula has the second highest concentration of engineers and scientists in the country, second only to Silicon Valley. So that should be even more a reason why we need this technology. We need high-speed rail to access our area, as Bobby mentioned, the largest metropolitan area directly on the Atlantic Ocean between Greater New York and South Florida. That's 1,000 miles, folks, 1,000 miles. And we are sitting ducks here if we ever have to get out of here in a hurry. So I appreciate your work. We're depending on you, we believe in you, and we're excited to see that this TPO and the board has teeth and is ready to move forward into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. That completes all the speakers. Before I move forward with the agenda, I neglected to recognize some very special people with us today. John Freeman from Norfolk Southern, Quentin Kendall from CSX, and Jeff Mann from Amtrak. We certainly welcome you all here today. I'll now move forward with item number 1 on the agenda, U.S. High-Speed Rail and Intercity Passenger Rail Strategic Plan Summary. Dwight?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I want to do is briefly take you through some of the basic work. I think I received some very excellent guidance in a teleconference I had between Jim Oliver, myself, and Steve Gardner, and he recommended that Jeff Mann be with us today. So I think Jeff is, after Kevin Page and I get done giving you some of the basics here, I think Jeff's going to bring you a very interesting perspective from Amtrak on what we're about to talk about. So this is a document in the board members' packet, in the packet today, and I'm just going to give you the cliff notes and highlights on it. The administration proposes that we have a national high-speed rail network, and I underscored the 100 to 600 mile intercity connection. I think that's an important statistic that we want to keep in mind. On the next item here, it's $8 billion. Everyone's heard about that. It's also a continuing investment of $1 billion. Relatively speaking, that's not near enough, but that is an unprecedented start of recent times. For the proposed funding approaches, I'm going to pick up just the key words so I can keep this brief with you. And under projects, the key words here are the federal folks are looking for ready-to-go projects. Now, there is also funding for projects that need to be made ready to go, but this is a very key word in this guidance. Under corridor programs, they're looking for advancement on projects that have been completed, again, ready to go, and also they're looking for a prioritized list. So we've been talking as a board about prioritization. The feds have been talking about prioritization. They feel that's very important. And under planning, there is use of non-ARRA economic stimulus funds to create projects, to get them in the pipeline and to get them ready to go. The near-term investments, express high-speed rail is above the 150 mile per hour range. I think we're really looking at possibly shooting for that, and I would recommend you consider that when we get to agenda item 4, where I would recommend you take action, and I'll talk about that on my last slide. I think that in talking with Amtrak, they recommend you shoot and aim high, and then tell them how to get there. And that's what you see in the left slide. On the second slide, it's really about 90 to 110 mile an hour, and then 110 to 150 mile an hour speed. And then I think, and hopefully when we get this EIS, you'll see that on the third piece of this graph on the far right, reliable, frequent intercity passenger rail service is really a key component to getting Hampton roads hooked into the national system, and that's what that far right side says. This is the map. I think everyone has seen the map. You can see the Amtrak in the light gray. You see the the high-speed, the corridors that are in existence and emerging in the blue, in the northeast corridor, and in the red. For proposed federal funding approaches, there are grants that will be out there for existing services. Again, in the middle of this slide, you'll see in the second bullet and in the first sub-bullet to that under A, they're still looking for ready-to-go projects that have been through the NEPA process and PE. They're looking for projects that demonstrate independent utility. So we're going to have to make a clear case for the projects that we want here. Under corridor programs, we want to make sure that we have a corridor that's based on a prioritized list of projects. Again, I think that's a very important word that they're looking for, and whatever subsequent board actions you take, I think we clearly ought to be able to communicate a prioritization here. And of course, in item B, they're looking for project costs and benefit estimates. When I get to another slide, you're going to see project costs are very important for these folks. For planning, another very important word to look for here is agreement. They're looking for cooperative agreements. In another slide, you're going to see a recommendation about master agreements, but that's very important for them in this planning process. The second bullet, these folks are looking for funding from you, from the state, and so forth, that they think you can put in a breach and make this happen. We're also looking to create a pipeline. So again, there is money available. I think Kevin can address that if you have a question, but I think there's money available to do planning on additional projects that you want to put in the pipeline, and I think we fall into that category. Going to cover prerequisites now in the federal guidance. They must demonstrate, that's us, must demonstrate that our proposal is consistent with the overall plan, and I think one of the overall plans that they'll be looking for is a statewide plan. Right now, I think, Kevin, we have a 2008 statewide plan that I guess is waiting for us to have our input, and hopefully we can have an update to that. Again, the word independent utility will have to be demonstrated, and of course, we'll have to show that we're addressing safety and other regulatory requirements. That's why we have Norfolk Southern and CSX here today. Under stakeholder agreements, the first three are very important here. Other states should be involved in this agreement, and I think North Carolina obviously could be a party to that. The infrastructure owners and the railroad operators who are here today, Norfolk Southern and CSX, probably should be a part of that agreement, and other stakeholders, and we have Amtrak here today. So that is an example of the kind of things we need to think about to get everybody at the table and in agreement on where we're going. As I said just a few minutes ago, USDOT, straight out of the regulations, strongly, and that's their word, not my word, strongly recommends putting together a master agreement. So we need to be thinking in terms of that. Financial plan. These folks are very serious about financial plans. We need to identify how we, localities and the state, will cover operating losses, if any. We need to identify, if possible, existing legislative commitments and previous records of covering operating costs. I think Kevin can confirm that the state of Virginia is very strong along those lines, both in long-term history and in recent efforts that they've put forth of putting a strong effort out there from the state. So I think that's working for us. And we need to have detailed project capital costs and where other non-federal sources of monies are coming from. I'm not going to dwell on this slide here, but I've used a phrase that many of you have used as a cliche, that the train is or is about to leave the station. If you look over this timeline here that was put out in April of this year, you will see the train really is about to leave the station on some of these, so you need to be very mindful that our time frame is a bit tight. There are funding sources for us to plan for improvements to get them ready to go, but as you can see, a lot of efforts are already underway. So this is a critical resource you want to keep in your hip pocket close by when you're deciding when to make decisions and how critical the time frame is. Now this is my last slide, and this is from staff's perspective here. This is not out of the regulations. This is after reading this material and understanding what you're trying to accomplish today. The very first one is the one, if you allow me just a moment to step on the soapbox and push you just a bit. I think today we need to have the board consider whether it can take action on endorsing a high-speed rail, intercity passenger rail strategic plan position or positions. So as we enter into item number 4, anyone and everyone who's talked to me about what we expect out of this, my recommendation is wherever you have a position or positions that you can agree on today, I think taking action to endorse those positions and then communicating those positions to the federal and state folks so that we can get our position in line for some of those funds would benefit us. I think we do need to have a partnership with Department of Rail and Public Transportation. They're here today. Norfolk Southern, CSX, and Amtrak, and they're all three here today. I think we need to, and I think, Jeff, as Steve Gardner told me on the phone when Jim and I were talking to him, I think that the third bullet box here is very critical, that when you tell them what your strategic plan is, when you tell the Federal Railroad where you want to go ultimately, they're going to then want you to describe to them the steps that you would like to take to get there. And I think that was a very good piece of advice that Steve gave us right out of the block when we started talking to you folks, Jeff. And then I think we need to coordinate with Kevin and Chip Badger and get with them on updating the 2008 statewide rail plan so that they have a clear picture on what you folks want to include in the next update to that plan. Mr. Chairman, that's my remarks. And
Thank you very much. Any questions of Dwight before we move to the second item? Okay, next will be the Richmond to Hampton Passenger Rail Environmental Impact Statement Project Status Report, Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. You want to make the introduction, Dwight?
yes, this is Kevin Page. I think most of you folks know Kevin. He's Chief of Rail at DRPT. He's had considerable experience. I will tell you, this gentleman is a walking encyclopedia, but he's got more information we could possibly absorb today, but Kevin knows that we're going to try to get to you folks as quickly as possible. So what we've asked Kevin to do is give you really an overview of the status of where we stand, particularly on that draft EIS. So,
We welcome you, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dwight, for those kickoff comments. I want to be as brief as possible today. Those of you who are here from the TPO Tech Committee, I've been down and spoken about the importance of connectivity to this region, whether it be the North Bank or the South Bank. I think rail connectivity is something that it's good that we are here today to continue that dialogue, as well as I came back with Chip Badger, our agency director, and actually spoke at the TPO as well with Chip that day that we came down as well. Today is just a brief overview and update as to where we are. Dwight has pretty well, and this is a slide you all have seen before, we have added on there March of 2010 is when we anticipate the round 2 track applications, the track 2 applications to be due back up at FRA. So that's a new addition to this slide, which you all have already seen. This is just a little bit of an update as to where we are on our high-speed rail application process. Through this application, we put in the Round 1 Track 2 application in October the 2nd for the $1.8 billion. Round 1 Track 1A application was just over $74 million that we put in for Arkandale to Powell's Creek. And just for the record, we also included this Track 1 project in our Track 2 Corridor Development Program projects. That way we didn't have an inoperable segment of about 11.4 miles north of Fredericksburg near Quantico. That would be in there if we didn't put that in for funding. And in addition to that, we also, in our pre-application process, notified FRA our intentions of coming in for our Round 2 Track 2 Richmond to Hampton Road segment project. And as I go through the timetable as to how we're going to hit that target and get that application in is the main reason why I'm here today. We're still, as Dwight went through very well, and I appreciate you having that slide, so I'll go over this one a little bit briefly, but just kind of let you know where Virginia feels that we stand. We are really well positioned, both with Norfolk Southern and CSX, VRE and Amtrak, the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, to develop passenger rail here in Virginia, especially higher speed rail through the ARRA process. We have framework agreements in place between the railroads. Dwight, you hit on that earlier as well as a good point. We also have 2 agreements with Amtrak. One to actually operate passenger rail service, which is key and critical because we've already been through that process as well. We also have an agreement in principle that's been signed between DRPT and Amtrak that is specific to the development of high-speed rail through the ARRA program. So we have 2 critical documents in place and agreements with Amtrak as well. All of our plans that we come forward with, including, for the most part, the Hampton Roads DEIS, we are trying to work within the rights-of-way that are already owned or controlled by the operating railroads that we are proposing to operate on. That is very key and critical. Obviously, the additional right-of-way purchase adds a lot of time to the context of the schedule when you're trying to meet it, especially for construction. Our high-speed rail corridor program, Virginia is very critically positioned, as I may add, between New York's all the way to Boston, the Northeast Corridor, and also the Southeast High-Speed Rail Corridor, which I'm going to talk about as a segue to this slide. No new news to this group. The Southeast High-Speed Rail Corridor includes the Hampton Roads segment. I heard some folks earlier today, and I know there's a couple of proposals floating around in concept about how to better deal with the Hampton Roads extension from a design criteria. But this is where we sit today environmentally with the Southeast High-Speed Rail Corridor. This is a slide that this group has seen, the TPO body as well as the Tech Committee. And as we move forward again today to discuss more about the Hampton Roads segment of that environmental process. Our high-speed rail initiatives coming forward for Hampton Roads includes the 5 alternatives that we've been studying that's finally coming to a head. We've been told by the Federal Railroad Administration that the release of the draft environmental impact statement is a top priority project for them right now to get that document out the door. I won't give you a date because I don't believe in giving dates because I have no control over that document other than to tell you that FRA says it's a high priority project and they will get this initiative out the door as quickly as possible. And also thanks for all those phone calls to FRA, whoever's been calling that they say they're hearing from. Status quo is no major improvements. That's inclusive of the Amtrak service that we have today at Newport News. That's 2 round-trip trains a day. No action is our baseline for how the draft environmental impact statement was crafted and how it will be moving forward. That included kind of regional plans to add 1 additional conventional train to Newport News. As you all may remember, the Amtrak short-term action plan that Jeff Mann was part author in, and thank you for all of that good work as well, Jeff, included the Richmond train, which we're going to try to get started here very soon, was originally proposed by Amtrak to start out of Newport News. We had some challenges on track capacity issues that we'll talk about in just a minute, but we ended up starting that train out of Richmond, but that's the no action includes that train proposal as well, so that's 3 trains to Newport News. Alternative 1 is continue the 3 daily conventional round trips to Newport News, make some enhancements to the Peninsula route to get on-time performance and reliability up, as well as introduce high-speed rail to the South Side Norfolk Southern route to Norfolk. That was 6 train movements round trip a day on that. Alternative 2A was 6 daily high-speed round-trip trains on the Peninsula route. We're doing a flip now, and then 3 daily conventional round-trip trains to the South Side route. So you take what you have in Newport News under no action, you flip that, come to Norfolk that way, and then enhance the Newport News corridor with the 6 higher-speed trains. Alternative 2B was have everything on the north bank, just north side only, 9 daily high-speed round-trip trains on the Peninsula route only. I get asked very regularly, well, why don't you just take all the trains off to Newport News and just say, why didn't you have a scenario that came to Norfolk only? And one of the challenges there is that you all may recall, Amtrak in its original system, which was begun in 1971, that system of trains included the Newport News service. So it would be very challenging for us to make an assumption that Amtrak would abandon that service and move everything to Norfolk without an agreement with Amtrak and further study to do that. We certainly have the completed technical reports, which this body is aware of, that are posted on our website, Rich to Hampton Rail, HRR Rail info. And as well, I'll go on, and Mr. Chairman, now to the overview of the next steps.
Very good.
As I said, FRA approves the relief, so the draft 1 EIS. That document will be initiated by DRPT after a process that I'll go through in just a minute. We'll revise the draft following public comments, and then submit that document plus recommendation to our Commonwealth Transportation Board, who will then in turn make a decision, which the CTB does, for regarding the preferred alternative as to which of the alternatives and scenarios that we would be recommending to the FRA for their consideration for a final document and record of decision. As soon as the CTB makes that decision, I want to be very clear to this group, because I know there are a lot of planners out there that are in the environmental process as a living. It's going to take a lot longer to get all the way to the final, the FEIS, the final document and record of decision, than we can follow through on and still compress ourselves to the March 2010 timeline. So I'll talk, Mr. Chairman, as to how we're going to walk through that in just a minute. But I just want to make you all aware that we will be able to, as soon as the CTB makes that decision, that we'll be able to go to the Round 2, Track 2 application process for this region. We will also, following that, prepare and submit the final EIS to FRA. The final document will obviously include comments, public comments, any corrections that have to be made in the document based on what came out in the public comment review process, as well as the CTB action and recommendation. Then following that, FRA will issue a record of decision on the alternatives that is eligible for federal high-speed funding. Following back, Mr. Chairman and members of the TPO and the public here today, again, once the CTB identifies that preferred alternative, which we've got a target for that we want to get the application in by approximately March of 2010. We'll move forward with that process, as well as funding must be identified to advance. And I think, Dwight, you mentioned this a little bit earlier. We need to have some funding to advance to the next phase of the project identified, as well as how we ultimately go about constructing projects and operating the service. This project timeline that I'm about to walk through with everyone very briefly is subject to the federal approval and release of the draft environmental document back to DRPT. Once we hear from FRA, the document has been returned to us as now suitable by FRA standards and approved for public distribution and comment. We, DRPT, will receive that document, and within the first week we will make the final edits to the document and prepare the document for printing. FRA may have some minor changes that have to take place in order for that to be ready for printing. At the same time, due to electronic publishing, we will put that document on our website, the Hampton Roads website. It is our goal that electronic publishing obviously can be done a lot faster, and we feel in transparency and getting this information out to the public, we want to do this as quickly as possible. We still have to follow the NEPA process, everyone. We have to print copies of these documents and then distribute them to a required notification list. Under NEPA, that's all of the libraries that are in the impacted area under study. All of the mayors and chairs, local governments will receive either a CD copy or printed copy, but printed documents have to be produced and posted publicly in libraries and other places identified. Once we get done with that, then we notify the FRA that has been done. They will in turn notify the Environmental Protection Agency that all copies have been distributed, and then the EPA publishes a notice of availability in the Federal Register. As you well know, those publications take place on Fridays. DRPT issues an announcement regarding the public hearing comment period, and then the schedule will begin. Public comment process is the 45-day process that both Chip and I have spoken before this body and run through before. We have to have the Federal Register posted. 30 days following that, we can start the public hearings. Then we have a 15-day open public comment period that has to take place following our public meeting process. And once that ends, it's back on the shoulders of DRPT to put together a public comment report, and also, once through that evaluation, work to put together a Commonwealth Transportation Board proposal and presentation based on the public comments, results, and obviously input from the mayors and chairs and local governments as well. The CTB will at that time choose a preferred alternative at their next action meeting. Our target is early 2010. Remember, Mr. Chairman, members of the TPO, we're shooting for a March 2010 application date. So I want to just kind of keep your thought process in your mind. March of 2010 is our target. That's the next target we're shooting for. The final EIS is going to take a little bit of time. You know, once we get everything together, we have to put the final document together, get it back up to the FRA for their review. They go back through that process again. We've seen the FRA take a lot of time on these documents or a little bit of time on these documents, depending on what changes have taken place and what comments on the preferred alternative as they come up. Once all of this is taken care of, the FRA will then, approve and release the final EIS to the public. And then upon final approval, the administration has to sign off. The document is filed with the EPA, and then the FRA issues a record of decision on the alternative available for federal funds. To that end, Mr. Chairman, I'll try to be as brief as possible because I know there's another speaker behind me, and I'm sure there's some great interest as to the following item behind Mr. Mann's presentation. So,
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
Chairman.
questions?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, I think. I know you went quickly. I'm not sure I followed all of it, but I think you couched some of your comments about all of this is dependent upon when the EIS, actually the draft gets released by the FRA. We're 5 months from March, right? And do you think you can, we'll say if the draft was released November 1st, can we have all that work done and so you can make an application in March of 2010 for funds?
yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, Mayor Frame has asked the question is can we fit the timeline, and the answer is yes. I think we have about a 30-day window there actually built in. We're kind of targeting the first or second meeting of our Commonwealth Transportation Board, and then still have the March.
So the CTB will be I mean, would you call a special meeting if you had to in order to get to that?
We would be hopeful. It's obviously up to the chairman of the CTB to call that meeting, Mayor Frame, but I feel very confident that we'll make that deadline.
Does the FRA need any other information, or are they asked any other questions of the Commonwealth or DRPT that it is information that's pending for them to release the draft?
No, sir. We have fulfilled all of the requests and provided all of the information to the Federal Railroad Administration. It's just now for them to go through what they call Chief Counsel review, and that's where it sits today.
One more
Please.
question. Record of decision, I take it is important in order to get in line for funds. Is that?
You are partially correct. The answer is yes. At the end of the day, the record of decision is very critical. Under the ERA application process, though, Mr. Chairman and Mayor Frame, what you will find out is that as long as we have a draft document in and the local preferred alternative has been identified, we can move forward with our application process concurrently with the environmental documentation going to the what they call the final EIS.
How long does it take to get a record of decision?
We're anticipating probably by next summer we will have one, which will fall in line again with the round 2, track 2 process. So we feel that I hate to use this astrological term, but I think all planets, if they fall into full alignment, sir, I think we're going to hit the target right on time.
Do you, I mean, and because I don't know, and this is my last question, do you think the FRA will seriously consider an application that does not have a record of decision when the funds are it's so competitive, the process is so competitive?
Well, I think that's a very good question, Mr. Chairman, Mayor Frame, and other members here of the TPO. As we went into the Track 1 process, that's in the Track 2 process, the Track 2 in particular, as Dwight Farmer was very good to point out, that's more of the programmatic, how you end up developing an entire corridor. In the United States, Virginia and North Carolina were the only 2 states that actually held a record of decision on a project corridor programmatic document. So we saw a lot of other applications go in under Track 2 from other states and other entities that filed their environmental document concurrently with their application. So this should give you an example, Mayor Frame, that I feel like we're still in very good shape, even if it's still a draft document with an LPA through the Commonwealth Transportation Board.
Thank you.
You concluded, Mayor Ward?
Can you tell us when we need to have our preferred alternative decided upon? Do you have an idea when would be the ultimate date that you need that?
Well, the Federal Railroad Administration, on the LPA, it's actually going to come from our Commonwealth Transportation Board. They will be the ones that actually will determine what the quote-unquote preferred alternative is. I use the term LPA because I know it's very commonly used in highway terms, but with the Federal Railroad Administration for such a long corridor program, it will be the CTB that will do the preferred alternative. We're shooting for that action to occur before March of 2010. We need that in place in order for our application to go forward. We feel to have some great confidence. Falling back on Mayor Frame's question, which was very appropriate, is that by having that preferred alternative action by our board, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, it helps solidify and tell the FRA, because our document will be published without a preferred alternative, that we've gone through the public process, we've listened to the public, received their input, and also moved forward with that preferred alternative as the final recommendation that will come forward to the Fed.
All right, so the CTV has to do it by March 2010.
It needs to be done before March of 2010, so January, February is what we're shooting for.
Other questions? Tom?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel like listening to the briefing, I feel like I'm on a high-speed rail right now, trying to sort it all out. And Mr. Chairman, catching my questions in terms of the follow-on actions, I think, or reference these resolutions that we're going to do.
Very good.
And I don't want to be rushed into this because we want to get a high-speed rail in here and we want to do it right, but I don't want to be rushed into a decision. And we can either spend the time now to answer the questions, because I think there's a lot of questions up there people need to step up and be ready to talk about. These alternatives. One of the resolutions I saw today, I just saw it when I walked in here, so that's my concern. Okay, on your alternatives, a high-speed rail and a time factor here. So if I understand this correctly, okay, when we get through here with a recommendation, this will eventually go over to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, from which they will make a decision as to the priority based on, I guess, a recommendation we're going to submit to them.
Mr. Chairman, I think what the question is, if I can just kind of paraphrase
Sure, go ahead,
a little
please.
bit, is that I feel today the region is going to come together and try to work collaboratively to set a priority as to where the region wants to go with a transportation rail high-speed plan. And from that point, we will start an environmental process, which is in parallel, I think, to the activities of today, where it would be beneficial for the region to have this action in place for our public comment period to make reference back to. We are running our DEIS public comment period concurrently, starting as soon as we get this document, as how this region is also coming together to set forth the strategies you're talking about, is how you develop high-speed rail and enhanced intercity passenger rail in the region. So under the action that I feel that is going to occur today is where the region is going to come together. Because one of the challenges that we have is we cannot choose both corridors for high-speed rail. We have to choose one or the other on the upfront side. And we have a scenario where we can develop and provide good, enhanced, and reliable intercity passenger rail, whether it be North or South Bank. But yet we still have to have a regional effort. It would be very beneficial to have this action as we go forward into this public comment process. Did I confuse you, sir? Or
Well, you did.
Okay.
I'm sorry. When you say that we're going to come together, I assume that we're going to come together with a resolution for you to go to do stuff.
Well, I think the resolution today, Mr. Chairman, is one that will be used as part of our analysis and evaluation of the public comments, because this is a public comment period we're about to begin.
Okay, so is the concrete forming on our recommendation when we come out of here? I mean, we're going to give you something, some marching orders, or some sense of where the direction we want to go. But that's still a big nebulous what if, okay? And we're running out of time. We got you're telling me March 2010, man, that's less than a year away. In fact, it's that's 6 months away.
Less than half a year.
So how are we going to get there from here? And you're talking about billions of dollars if we're still squabbling over some of the nuts and bolts, which I'm not sure that we've come to agreement on. So I'm asking questions now, so if we can speed it up, that's great, okay? So I want to make sure I understand the process. I don't want it to be misconstrued or nebulous. I want it to clearly understand the public that we do step A, we go to step B.
Right.
So I think this is step A. We're going to come together, okay? We're here, so we're going to come to agreement. What is step B? I still don't get a picture of what we're going to do next.
Okay, well, regionally, step B, I think, will have to be determined from the region's perspective. I can tell you what step B is for Virginia.
Okay, what's step B for Virginia?
Your step B is our step A. We will start a public comment period on the draft environmental impact statement. That's our step A, which in essence will be your step B, because then at that point, that's when the region and citizens and the mayors and chairs and all political subdivisions in the impact area of this study have the opportunity to speak publicly and also provide written comment as to what they think should be molded out of the alternatives that are set forward up on the screen today. That's our process. This is step A for us,
Okay.
step B for you. And then as we go through that process, we will receive those comments, close the public comment period, evaluate those comments, and then develop a report that goes to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which I think there are 2 members of the board that I've seen here today. That will be carried to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which is our step B, which is your step C. And we will move forward through that process, and then from that point, the Commonwealth Transportation Board for the Commonwealth of Virginia in this study will make a preferred alternative decision and recommendation to the Federal Railroad Administration on one of these 5 alternatives.
Great, and I actually understood that.
Okay.
So, the point is that we're launching a recommendation for action, and then you've got to do this environmental study, okay?
Right.
And we're going to do all this, and where does the March 10 part come in? That's to the Commonwealth Transportation Board?
No, sir. The March of 2010 is when we will have, we, the Commonwealth of Virginia, will have hopefully a round 2 opportunity to apply for stimulus funds.
To the federal government?
To the federal government, yes, sir.
Wow, you're going to do that in 6 months? Wow.
Right. And I may add to that comment, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is if you look at what we had to put together between South Richmond and Washington, D.C. in a matter of weeks,
Yeah.
you have months. We put a $1.8 billion application together, including an entire corridor development plan in a very tight window. We have delivered that quality of work. It's been with the benefit, I see Quentin over there, CSX has been at the table with us on that process. It's a collaborative effort in order to make this deadline, but if we all work together and pull the rope, we'll raise the flag.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I got a couple more questions.
Please.
Bless you.
Bless you, yeah. Let's look at alternatives. The no action is not an action. I mean, I just understand it as a baseline. But alternative 1, alternative 2, and alternative 2B. I mean, what we have is, I don't want to get to the big hand, little map approach to this, okay? Because this is, we're getting down to, I think, a peninsula or south side issue, which is going to bubble up in some form here. So let's get the questions and stuff squared away right now. And we talk about, and I'm particularly interested in is the 2A. So in this particular case, you would have a high-speed rail, if I understand the 2A, that you have a high-speed rail from Richmond. It would come down from the north, somehow hit Richmond, and then it'd hook over towards Newport News. Is that correct? Am I reading?
All right, you want me to run back? Which alternative did you speak again, because I couldn't hear you on the...
Okay, let me do this again. Okay,
Alternative
6, it says-
2A is you would have 6 high-speed round-trip trains, and I'll try to use the mouse here if I can. They'll start at Main Street Station. Actually, obviously, they're coming from the north.
Right.
Starting Washington, D.C., probably as far north as Boston, Massachusetts. Come to Richmond, Virginia, Main Street Station downtown. Then we'll run down the existing corridor, CSX's corridor to Newport News.
Okay, that's the
Okay.
high-speed rail, right? And that would
That's
be
for
what,
high-speed
100
rail, yes, sir.
We're looking at the 190 mile an hour or whatever it is.
It would be, we have 2 scenarios, sir. It's
150.
90 and 110.
Okay, so that would be, okay. Yeah, that would be really smoking.
I'm sure Mr. Kendall's prepared to do 190, but...
Okay, so anyway, so it comes down through there and then it just stops.
Right.
Okay, in that alternative, what happens to the south side?
Okay, alternative 2A, then the south side will receive services under this alternative, conventional rail, which would be 3 round trips to Norfolk and then back to Main Street Station.
So there's no connection across the water?
No, sir.
Because of the cost, I guess, that was
That's
proposal?
correct. That's correct. Just for the, Mr. Chairman, we in our ridership analysis included, because of the long, it's in the long-range plan, the third crossing being built, but it does not have a multimodal tube in this scenario and alternatives analysis.
Okay, and then so if I jump back up to, we go to 1. Well, so then it would come down through Washington, D.C., whatever, through Richmond, and it would go right into Petersburg.
That's correct. Under alternative one, you have 3 conventional trains to the Peninsula route, which means you pick up 1 additional train. Today at Newport News, you have 2 round-trip trains a day. You'll pick up 1 additional train, and also some enhanced improvements to CSX's railroad to optimize efficiency of train operations, and remember also to increase the on-time performance of these trains that currently run on this corridor on the north side. The south side will get 6 high-speed rail trains daily, round trip, out of the northeast corridor to Richmond and then on down to Norfolk and back.
So essentially, though, from the south side to the north side, you either get off up at Richmond to get to the peninsula, or you rent a car and you drive it through the tunnel.
That's correct. Or you use HRT's shuttle service back and forth.
Okay, either way, you're essentially on the ground.
You're on public
going through
transit
there.
or private rental, either way.
And you in your considerations for this, you took into account the fact that if you go up to, you got Norfolk Airport over here in Norfolk, then you got the Williamsburg Airport down in Newport News, and then you've got Richmond just south of there. So you got those 3 kind of in a line, but I guess you took that into account in your consideration?
Yes,
or
sir.
the recommendation?
Yes, sir.
Or proposal? Okay, thanks.
One of the things that I might raise a year and a half, 2 years ago, when it first came up, was the necessity for having dual lines. And we asked you to explore kind of the end of the CSX line in Newport News and a spur across the JRB to connect eventually at Bowers Hill and Suffolk. And we never saw anything back on that.
That was one of the alternatives, I believe, Christine, was considered but dismissed. We did look at that, and it's in the alternatives analysis. And typically in the environmental process, Mr. Chairman, we do look at alternatives but can dismiss them through documentation.
I'm sorry?
We can take alternatives and consider them but have them dismissed through the documentation. If they prove to be cost prohibitive over the other alternatives, then we have the opportunity to dismiss those based on the study document.
Is it cost prohibitive when you were able to eliminate, 90 miles of rail? I got to see that.
Okay.
I've never seen it.
Are you-
I've never seen any documentation dismissing that. So I'd like to see that.
Okay.
Bruce?
Kevin, as part of the CTB process for their decision-making, is there any kind of process that's been established for weighting the various information that has to be diagnosed? Because you're going to have costs in there, and you're going to have where the population densities are, you're going to have tourism impacts. Are they going to? Do we know in advance how they're going to weight those things, or is it just going to be they're just going to kind of get together in a room and think about all those things and come up with a decision? Help me a little bit with that.
The question is how will we develop the preferred alternative? What you will find when the draft document is published, you will find that in that document there's a metrics of what it will cost to actually operate and improve the services. Obviously, you're going to have some infrastructural costs, some train start costs, operating costs, and also time savings. You're looking at 4 critical pieces there, as well as following that will also be public input from obviously the region, the discussion that we're having here today. That will go forward. We will work through that process and try to develop and balance in that evaluation the costs of doing operations under its particular scenario based on public input, and also the regional prioritization of what they feel is the best alternative. Then at that point, we'll work through it from there.
See, that doesn't really help me though, because if you don't go into it without a roadmap, you really don't know where you're going to end up. For say, if the region or the TPO has a particular preferred alternative, and you rate that, say it's 50%, then cost, whether cost is double or not, doesn't weigh as heavy as what the local region alternative is. And so I don't see how you can make those decisions on the fly. You need to kind of in advance decide what important points are most important in developing that decision.
Right. And those are the 5 points I just gave you. Those are going to be our points.
Is there any kind of weight to establish ahead of time?
Well, we can certainly work to have that as part of the public process. We will develop that and have that coming forward.
Because the thing we need to understand going into it is is if you've got $8 billion available, and you've got one alternative that might cost $1 billion and one alternative that might cost half of that, we don't want to lose our opportunity here as well. And I'm sure that you've been thinking about that to a lot of extent. And so it would be good to understand how that decision is going to be made before it's made.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Paul?
Kevin, you mentioned your ridership analysis, and you referenced the third crossing.
Yes, sir.
Is it my understanding that that you included in your ridership analysis the understanding that the third crossing would be built for cars? Is that right?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, Mayor Frame, the question has been couched by Mayor Frame is the third crossing is in the long-range plan, so we have to, in this environmental process, include the region's transportation plans. So the answer is yes, we had to include that as an operating highway facility. We did not have a multimodal tube as part of that.
And that would support your analysis of how many riders are going to take the train on the peninsula?
Short answer is yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Kevin, I wonder if you could just briefly discuss speed. You know, when you look at the two alternatives you have, I understand high-speed rail is 110 miles an hour, but could you just compare and contrast briefly the peninsula route versus the south side route, NS? In terms, I mean, it looks to me like the NS route could be really high speed because it's so straight. And I understand the peninsula route has some challenges, and I know that the NS route has some challenges as well with grade separations, but I'm just kind of wondering if one of them were to go conventional or emerging high speed, what does that mean? Does it mean 79 to 90 miles an hour or what?
Right. Thank you. For those who couldn't hear Jeff Lawrence's question, he wanted me to talk about conventional rail versus high-speed rail, North Bank and South Bank. What you'll find when we release the document is we'll have a comparison of costs based on 79 miles an hour, 90, and 110 miles an hour. Obviously, if you look at the map, the CSX route is a little bit more geographically challenged because it actually has a lot more curves to the railroad than what Norfolk Southern's line has. Both railroads have been analyzed for 90 and 110 mile an hour sections. You will probably find when you look at that costs, although distances are somewhat shorter, we did have to include from Petersburg to Richmond for discussion purposes as part of the document because we did have to include that section if in fact the Southeast High Speed Rail Corridor was not built. Looking at the south side, the NS South route, if we're looking for true high-speed rail, we have to build a separate rail facility beside the existing NS facility, so we still have costs associated with that. We're hopeful that Norfolk Southern will continue dialogue and discussions as to how we can potentially commingle 79-plus mile an hour service on their existing railroad facility and somewhere or another draw a line in the sand as to how fast we could go on their existing railroad by making infrastructure improvements versus how fast we could go by having to grade separate and go off their existing two-track system into a three-track system. So those are the challenges we have right there is that regardless of whether we go from the peninsula route or the south side route, we need to make sure that we understand that under our analysis we have separate facilities being constructed on both railroads in order to get to that 90 mile and 110 mile an hour section. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. Folks, next we're going to have the high-speed rail service Amtrak perspectives, but I'm going to suggest that we stop for 10 minutes, get out, get your box lunch, bring it to your seat, and we'll eat as we listen.